It can be used for
Sure.
anything else. Okay, here we are already. Welcome back, everyone who's watching us live. So, as already written on LinkedIn, this show runs 1 week later than I planned, and one day usually later than we usually do it, just because I wanted to have Jay here, and so this was the best time for him to do it. And so, welcome, Jay. It's great to have you here,
Great
and
to be on the show. Thank you.
yeah, no, I think it will be really interesting. And can you maybe quickly start with a quick introduction so everyone has some kind of an idea of
Absolutely.
what
Yeah,
who you are and where you come from?
sure. Jay Iyer. I am VP of Data Engineering for Televisa Univision for the streaming side. And I have about close to 30 years in the IT industry, about 20 years in data. So I can consider myself a leader in data and a data specialist. And I'm still very hands on. And outside of work, I'm a musician and I work on my own music.
That's great. What is the stuff that you still do hands on?
Um, I do code reviews. I
Yeah.
still write a lot of SQL because there's always things that are happening. I sit in all the review boards and the design, and my team usually says that I'm two steps ahead of them. So I'm kind of glad that I'm that
Oh,
level of.
that's good. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how is your so I'm just asking because I'm always curious. So how is your relationship with SQL? So for example, I have a very complicated relationship with SQL. So I never really feel a warm embrace when I work with this. So I have a Python background. If I can do Python, I still like to do it.
Mhm.
So, but of course, like in the current world, I have to do SQL, and I think I made peace with that. But so, how's your relationship with SQL?
So you have to remember, I'm old school. I
Yeah.
started with SQL Server 4.5,
Okay.
Oracle 5, and basically Sybase when they were, close to being the same product with SQL Server. So I've spent most of my work in the data field and, writing C++ or Java
Mm.
and SQL. So my relationship, I would say, is not complicated at all, though every time I interview, I see that the folks who are newer to data engineering struggle a bit with SQL, and they're
Mm.
always like, "Hey, I can do it in Python."
Mm.
you know, yeah. So I'm very comfortable with SQL. I've gone through my years as a data warehouse developer, and gone through like pages and pages of stored procedures. So now it's not that level of complexity, but
Mm.
more making sure that there's enough data quality and enough signals so that I know that I can quickly do my checks.
Yeah.
The logic, I still do mostly reviews of my team's work.
Yeah. Wait, I have two questions because like it's super interesting to have someone with such an history. So, what would you say, like, let's say, where you started out to work with SQL or with databases? It was totally different kind of environment. So you had a lot more limitations, what you already
Yeah.
said. So, what are the things that you learned at that time that are still pretty useful today, which we might not learn because like you immediately go into a cloud warehouse setup?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things you have to understand is that, for example, if you're working on, say, Exadata on an Oracle appliance, there's definitely limits, right? So there's you can only run so many queries in parallel, and
Hmm.
so when you're in an environment where you're kind of resource constrained, you tend to work more on optimizing your SQL, on using hints in the case of Oracle. But in general, you try to write more efficient SQL because you want it to run in a parallel environment, right? Because usually you're in situations where Monday morning there's one team that's running this heavy SQL, and oh, be careful, don't run anything
Hmm.
else on the server. Those kinds of, like, we had to share the system to now cloud-based systems. Nobody really cares because it's quite elastic, and you are, in a way, you're not incentivized to optimize your SQL. And so, you tend to basically just run the SQL, maybe not
Hmm.
apply the right kind of filter. You're like, I don't care. I have my own compute instance behind it. It's
Yeah.
definitely, but To me, I still think that that experience helps me write better SQL, because the first thing you're thinking about is what kind of partitioning, what kind of filtering are
Mhm.
applied to your SQL. Because at the end of the day, there is a cost involved with it. It's just that it's your workload is not shared now. You have your own isolation.
Yeah, but there's still a machine running for it, and so then you have to pay for it. I
Mhm.
think this is quite interesting. So I guess, do you still incorporate this when, let's say, in your team, when they basically write SQL, so that you have this kind of guidelines to say, okay, this is what we do?
Absolutely. I can give you an example. So we had a project that was done by some consultants, and it was costing us quite a bit. It was costing
Mhm.
us close to $400,000 a month.
Mhm.
And so as soon as the consultants rolled over, we just went in there and we started hacking with a hacksaw, and we realized that a lot of it was partitioning and filtering,
Mhm.
and we were able to reduce close to $360,000 of cost
Wow.
just by reducing the amount of data scanned. And so it really, these are, I would say, if somebody is new to SQL, it's not only important to understand SQL, but also to understand what is the cloud platform you're running it on, and how partitioning and clustering and all that works in your favor.
Yeah. How much? Because like this will be something where we go into in a second a little bit more. So
Sure.
how does the, let's say, the event data, how does event data change the approach, let's say, to data modeling? So does it
Yeah.
make it easier or does it make it more complex in a way?
So, in a way, it is complex because now you have time series data that's coming in
Hmm.
at a very high velocity
Yeah.
and a very high volume. You're talking, easily billions of events per day, and you have some standard patterns where you get it through some kind of a streaming pipe, you land it in a staging table, and then you have hourly or less than hourly batches that take the latest set of data, process it, and then you send it through some kind of a curation process, and finally ends up in a mart, which is
Hmm.
kind of like a star schema based reporting, right? So now what happens is, not only are you looking at specific windows of data, but also when you're looking at the analysis, you want to look at signals across time, right?
Yeah.
So there are some newer methods of looking at it, where basically as and when the signals come in, you kind of latch it, and then that way you're taking the time series data and you're kind of making it into like a signal based data. There are things that are happening. There are some white papers out there, and some companies are doing that. But for the most part, you're taking streaming data, you're windowing it, you're looking at it in a tabular form, and then now within that, you're doing all your processing, and you're sending it through your data pipeline. And it gets even more complicated if you're doing any kind of session analysis, because then you have to look at a wider window, and you have to look at data that is clean, deduped. You can't
Yes.
do that on the raw data.
Yeah. So do you have this kind of, and this is basically already, let's say, opening the door to our core topic today. It's like, let's say, maybe can you give us, as an introduction, can you give us a little bit of background for, let's say, for what kind of product you're currently building, or let's say you have the data setup, and so like, I think
Yeah,
we already have a, let's say, a little bit of idea that it creates a lot of
absolutely.
events, but
No,
for
I'll,
what
I'll
can help.
I'll get to the
Yeah.
basics and nuts and bolts. So what we do, one of the main things that my team does, is we are collecting and curating video streaming behavior data.
Mhm.
So the video streaming, most video streaming platforms have apps that run on Roku, Android, all the different end platforms. And basically, they have instrumentation built in that collects signals. So
Mhm.
when I'm clicking on a piece of content, when I'm watching a piece of content, when I navigate to another screen, when I do a search, all those signals are captured. And basically, what we have is, this is kind of standard. You
Mhm.
start with a spec. You start with a pretty comprehensive spec that allows you to collect signals, and allows
Mhm.
you to collect signals at a level of granularity where, whether we use it initially or not, it'll somehow end up in some kind of analysis downstream, right? So, and the spec evolves. as and when we need to do more tracking, more signals will be added. So it's kind of a flexible uh, schema that you build. So it
Hmm.
starts with that instrumentation spec, and then that instrumentation spec is implemented by the device developers, right,
Yeah.
who create the app on the different devices. And then that gets collected, goes through a QA process and gets released, and then it gets into a streaming pipeline. It's
Hmm.
collected, it's put through some kind of a streaming platform, Kafka, PubSub, Kinesis, you name it, any of those, just so that you're able to handle back pressure and you're able to
Hmm.
be more efficient with that
Yes.
streaming. And that streaming data usually either lands in a object store and gets sucked into a staging table or gets pushed directly into a staging table. The latter is better because if there's a failure somewhere along the line, you still have the raw data sitting
Mhm.
in storage, right?
Yeah.
So that gets sucked up into your staging table. And this could be like based on the size of the file, or it could be time based, like every 5 minutes, every 10
Hmm.
minutes, but the point is, you reliably, with the current tools we have, you're reliably able to collect this and then take it out and put it in a cloud storage,
Yeah.
in a cloud database.
Yeah.
You put it in a cloud database, and then you figure out what is the time window you want to curate that data. So that raw data may have duplicates, may have
Hmm.
some anomalies. So there's a cleansing process that takes it and it puts it in a curated table, and that works on the newer data that has arrived. So there's always a pointer that tells you, okay, this is the watermark where the data
Yeah.
last landed. So that way you're not scanning back. You might scan back 7 days to look at
Hmm.
duplicates, but for the most part, the curation process gives you that cleansed data. And there could be other data sets you're enriching it with, right? For example, one of the things we do is we do geo IP enrichment.
Yes. Yeah.
Use the IP, we get the geo, so we fill in the geo fields. So there's some minor enrichment we do, but from there on, that data set is usually sent down to the lake house and also sent
Hmm.
to any kind of a star schema warehouse, where it's broken up into dimensions and facts. And
Hmm.
along the way, we are also doing we are making sure that there's schema versioning, and we are doing all the metadata management as well.
One question about the schema, because like this is something, let's see, in the project that I do, and usually I work a lot on this kind of end of things.
Mhm.
So one of the big question which is always there is like, because like I mean you are multi-platform by default, so you
Yeah.
already said it. Like, how do you handle this? So do you really have a, let's say, a very good core schema that is basically used across all platforms, and then you have some variations that are maybe individual to platforms, or how do you manage that this doesn't end up in chaos with ending up 400 different unique
Yeah.
schema
So
items?
definitely it's a centralized schema. And depending on, because I know that certain platforms have quirks, right? Certain libraries
Mhm.
cannot really collect the data or produce the data in a way some other SDK library is doing. So there's definitely some amount of bandwidth there, but those are
Mhm.
mostly on the optional fields. The required fields have to come through no matter what. So we make sure that the required fields are coming through, and then the optional fields are in the spec. And sometimes you may also have platform specific fields.
Yeah.
So it's a question of having a core
Mhm.
spec that collects what you absolutely need, and then an extended spec that allows you to be a little bit more flexible. And also, we do rely a lot on JSON freeform fields. That
Mhm.
way, what happens is I don't have to keep changing my schema every time
Yes.
the change,
Yeah.
right? You basically have JSON fields that have a spec that is defined, and a lot of the properties are optional there, and the curation
Mhm.
process will know how to process that. That way, for example, if there's a particular feature that's a future feature, but you want to make sure that
Mhm.
you put in the hooks for it, You will set up a JSON field, and when it's ready, when the spec is ready, you just use that field and you change the ETL code to process the specific JSON data in that field, right? So
Yeah.
that way you're quickly able to collect the information, because the hardest part is the time it takes from when product says, hey, we don't have this signal, we need to track this signal,
Hmm.
to that signal spec going across all the apps and them instrumenting it. We are doing the QA, and then finally we're moving it to production and collecting it, right? So because now what happens is it touches every major touch
Yeah.
point along the data stream, from your curation logic, ETL logic, to your star schema logic. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Do you enforce schema, or is it just like that you test against a specific schema and give warnings when things are not
We
working?
actually have schema validation. So
Okay, but
we do specify what's
yeah.
optional and what is required. And definitely, if it doesn't match, there's rejection. And rejection goes into its own
Okay.
storage area. And that there's a separate process that picks that up and actually gives us what's wrong, right?
Hmm. Now, this totally makes sense. And I think, I mean, of course, like it's a quite advanced setup, but it's definitely something that I saw in other places as well, and I think it works really well. So one question is like, so okay, you described how the data flows. So where is, let's say, I don't know how to say it, like where are your customers within your company? So where basically, let's say, the work of, let's say, the data team kind of ends, and so where is this interface at which
Sure.
point?
Sure. So the data engineering teams basically landed, at least in my current position, we landed into a data lake.
Hmm.
So I'll talk about the data lake in a minute because it's interesting what we have done here.
Hmm.
But the handoff basically happens with the curated cleansed data landing in the data lake and the BI teams picking it up.
Okay.
And they are basically building their data marts. I've seen other. I used to work at a different streaming platform a couple of years ago where we owned everything until the semantic layer, which
Hmm.
means star schema
Yeah.
and even the aggregate tables. And then BI picked it up from there and then built their semantic layer, and then it goes to the reporting. So our users are basically, there's several users. So there's the data teams who are our internal users that consume data from our lakehouse, from the data lake,
Hmm.
data science, BI, other data engineering teams. And then we have the extended users who are using the Looker dashboards that are built by BI, and
Yeah.
that's driven off of all the marts that are built by BI. And we have product and engineering teams that are also using tools like Qubit, which basically get that raw stream of data, and they're able to do the visualization without any of this SQL transformation.
Okay, so they basically get the, let's say, kind of the short track. Um,
Yeah, they get it because, again, there is a need for both, right? There is a
mhm.
need for quickly looking at trends, quickly looking at cohort analysis, and those Sankey diagrams that show you, hey, how are they, what's the behavior, and that kind of stuff can be done very quickly with a tool like Qubit. And there's also the need for really granular reporting. How many subs did we get today, what's the churn. There's stuff that the BI teams excel and the analysts they excel in, and that is its separate track. So really, the raw data, the cleansed data can serve both. But in our case, we just decided to get Qubit the data straight from our stream
Yeah, yeah.
because
No,
it was time to market.
it totally makes sense. Like, I think this is super interesting because, like, this is kind of, let's say, the conversion that I work quite often. So I come from product analytics, so I know these use cases pretty well, and it took me a while to understand how BI works because, like, for me, like, I come from event analysis, sequence analysis, and so on. For me, like, BI was always a little bit weird because I didn't really got what they're doing there. So what would you say? What is the essential part that's happening? That's in this part. where let's say the BI analysts take over and build data marts, which is not happening on the product analytics side. So what do they ensure in this kind of step that is so important for BI to be in place?
Absolutely. So it depends totally on the end users, right? So BI organizations are usually under the COO or the
Yeah.
CFO. It's usually under a C-level person. And stakeholders are looking at how the business is doing. What is the pulse of the business? How much money did we make yesterday? How many subscribers did we add yesterday because of this show? How can we improve the business? So there's quite a bit of slicing and dicing that goes on, and for that they will need access to the raw data or some level of aggregated data that
Mhm.
still has raw elements to it, right? So that way they can actually build the logic in their dashboards to serve that purpose. And also there is an urgency in what they do, in the sense that somebody might say, I want this report tomorrow because I have an earnings call or something. So their level of stress is much higher. But also they are, they are good at translating the raw data, or more like the aggregate data, into what makes business sense.
Mhm.
Whereas product analytics, we are looking at, okay, we just rolled out this feature, how sticky
Yeah.
is it, right? I don't need to know exact numbers, but I need to know if there was a lift, what was the percentage of lift. So product analytics is, it's more like, I need to know right now, but it can be quick and dirty. I don't care about, what needs to go to the street. So there is a certain level of tolerance there, because I'm trying to see how quickly I can experiment and get answers to the get
Mhm.
the signals from that experimentation, and say, are we in the right direction? If not, fail fast, move to the next experiment, right? So it's a different, it's a different cadence. It's also a different type of, what I say, veracity, right? You have volume, validity, veracity, and velocity of data. That's like the
Yeah.
four big data V's, right? So here, what we are looking at is, how quickly can I get to some signal to tell me that, okay, I'm moving in the right direction. Whereas on the BI side, there's a little bit more curation involved. There's a little bit more, you have to massage the data a little bit
Mhm.
more, make sure that executives can make business sense out of this data.
Do you see, because like this is something at the moment I'm thinking a lot about this. Do you see a future where these two parts emerge? Because like
Absolutely.
because like there's a lot of stuff happening in between, and I guess like what you described, you have even like for the BI part, quite straightforward setup. But I know setups that, I mean, they basically create 400 copies of the data under the lens in a BI system, and with every copy I can basically screw up things, so I have 400 times the
Absolutely.
chance to screw
Yes.
up things. So
There's a lot of projections of data, right?
mhm.
And a lot of times, my team or the instrumentation team or analysts in general, we're just running around saying, hey, why is it different here? Why is it not different there? And if your business rules are not clearly defined somewhere, you're not going to know about it. And and it can cause all kinds of stress. I know totally. And to your point of merging, so this is where I think the merging is going to happen. For you to run a good BI practice, you need resources. You
Yeah,
need funding, you
exactly.
need resources, and you need the executives to understand that, right? But with the advent of AI, with the advent of a lot more smarter tools in the middle, you can actually get pre-canned reports out the box that are just as good, and that can get a smaller team just up and running, and they can run with one or two analysts who can just do some deep dives, if need be, bespoke type work. But even that, a lot of teams, a lot of these tools allow you to get there. So I'm very excited that actually with AI and with more advancements and more maturity in this whole pipeline, I think that there's definitely going to be a need for that bespoke stuff. But for
Mhm.
most companies who don't have the budget but still need the signals right away, right? And understanding the trends, and also, at an exact level, business speak, I think the tools are getting there.
When I think that, yeah, I totally can see this. So the interesting question for me is like, when we assume that we have some part, let's say, of a middle layer that AI can serve for us and can basically create these massive variations that people might need, and then of course, like no team can basically serve manually. What kind of, I mean, I know this is still a hypothetical question. So, what kind of structure, even like let's say a model, still needs to do this or to do a good job in this kind of middle layer? Or how do you create feedback loops into this? So to say, okay, yeah, good first approach, but it doesn't really fit. So I mean, of course, like you have to train it. It's not just.
Yeah.
I still don't really see the cases how we can train it properly.
So, a simple thing is anomaly detection.
Yeah.
And also with the assistants that just got released over the past
Hmm.
several months, I can tell the assistant, this is my data, and then write me a SQL to find anomalies. It has to be specific. You can't just say go find anomalies. You have to say, like, find me this where it's this much percentage over that, right? So we can definitely do that now, where we can, with the proper hints, we actually get the SQL.
Yeah.
We are able to get the basic SQL. Of course, you have to do some tweaking to it, but
Hmm.
we are at the infancy of that stuff. So we can always build these feedback loops by uh, letting the system find the anomalies and then feeding it back to make it better. Again, we're not there yet, and I don't know what other advancements are going to get us there, but I think we've kind of seen the path, right?
Yeah.
It's not rocket science, or it's basically conceivable now. I mean, like, you look at a Star Trek program and the guy goes, computer, tell me this, and we're getting there.
This is the crazy part, honestly. Like, of course, like I know I watched Star Trek when I was 11, so and I grew up with this kind of world. But even like, and I'm in the, let's say I'm in the data space and also like computer space also like already for, I guess also for 20 years already. And
Mhm.
so for me, it was always like, okay, it was still so far away. So of course, like there were small incremental steps, but it still was so far away. And then we had this explosion
Yeah,
last year where we
yeah.
basically say, okay, we make it visible, which is yeah still hard to grasp, but you're right. So
Yeah, I mean, I'm a skeptic. I let things mature a little bit, because
yeah,
right now there's so many things going on. You just cannot latch onto one thing because it may be obsolete next week, right?
yeah,
So I'm more on the wait and see. Let's look at the more mature signals that are coming out of this revolution, right? But I do feel that with the right kind of um, guidance, that I think this is where you need seasoned data people to
mhm,
actually work with the people who are building the models, to actually say this is what makes sense.
yeah,
Because I tend to find that people, no matter what age, they have the shiny tool syndrome, right? Or they look at the newest shiniest thing and they say this is it. But really, the shiny thing may be doing something, but is that what you need for your business, or
yeah,
is that bottom lining what you want to get out of your data infrastructure and the investment, right? So I
mhm,
think that's where some level of maturity needs to be there, and you have to have some seasoned people who can look at it and go, okay, I know what the tool can do, but I know strategically for data how we can use this.
yeah. And let's pick the seasoned people. And you said before, like there will be still cases where someone actually goes in there manually because like this is such a, let's say it's such a, how to say, specific kind of question that might be hard to answer.
Hmm.
And when I take this, and I know that I mean you do music, you do video, you do movies, and you do data. So let's say put both on one plate, you would say, okay, this is totally different things. So the one is very deterministic, rational, and so on. And I think the other one is definitely more spontaneous, more creative. But
Hmm.
I truly believe that there is a big creative part, also like when it comes to data. And so I don't
Absolutely.
know, what would you see? So what is the creative part when working with data?
I mean, the possibilities are endless. That's what I see. So it all starts. at least let's take this example, right? This field where we are
Hmm.
video streaming or some kind of a customer facing high touch activity where we want to make sure that we get all the signals so that we can better serve our users. If you just take that example, it all starts with making sure that your specifications for signal collection is tight.
Yeah.
That is where it starts. But once you have that and you're able to flexibly add to it and collect more signals, the derivative possibilities are where the creativity comes in.
Mm.
Because you will never know what the data tells you unless you go digging. And so you have to have that creative approach. Like, when I pick up my guitar and I say, today I'm going to write a song, I don't know what comes out of it. But there is a certain level of conditioning. I've played for more than 25 years. There's this bits of ideas coming through. I may hear a car horn, or I may hear my neighbor's gardener just cutting through these sounds you hear. And the mood that you're in, you may have had a really stressful, day, and you come in, somehow that combines right here and something comes out, and then
But
it gets.
how does it happen in data? Because like I think this is super
And that's the
interesting what you
thing.
say.
So
Yeah.
similarly, your raw data is just, especially when you have volume,
Yeah.
there are so many signals you don't know unless you go digging. And the way I see it is, a person who's a seasoned, he's going to have a little bit more of an idea of high value digging, right? What is it that
Hmm.
I can do that can actually has a higher impact than just something that just you're chasing your own tail. And then you use the assistants to basically help you get that subsets of data, and then you start looking
Yeah.
into it. And I think that's how you have to apply the inorganic analogy, sorry, the organic analogy of creating music to data in a way where you say, I have all this information, and
Mm.
I have these assistants at my fingertips who can, it's like having a junior engineer say, okay, go write the SQL for me, right?
Mm.
You have that. But now you actually have the flexibility to experiment and look at signals and come up with things that, maybe out of the blue gives you something new, right? Just like how data scientists look for signals, needle in a haystack, and, when they find it, it's amazing.
So if I take this, so let's say because you said season and junior, I think this is interesting. So let's take someone starting out, or another scenario, you are the first person, let's say in a startup who starts out in the data
Hmm.
team. So like you basically build the data team.
Yeah.
And let's assume you are not someone who did it already 5 times before. So basically, to
Hmm.
some, it landed in on your plate. So
Yeah.
you have to do this. So what is usually like from you, what would be the advice for this kind of persons to start out? So what should they prioritize?
Having been there,
Mhm.
several decades ago, I understand. You know, before we did not have social media, we did not have LinkedIn, we did not have these networks. But now you have all these networks, and you have the access to seasoned people.
Mm,
I mean, I've always found that if you ask, people never say no.
true.
They might, put some constraints on how they can slice their time to help you,
Mm,
but people never say no. So you have to reach out. And I think if you try to figure it out yourself and compare that approach to actually approaching a few people on LinkedIn saying, hey, I have this problem, can I borrow 10 minutes of your time, or can I take you out to lunch, old school way of building relationships. I think you'll find that you're going to get a lot more sane advice talking to seasoned people. And that'll give you an idea of how you can apply that to your use case, as opposed to trying to just Google or, hey, ChatGPT, tell me how can I build a data streaming platform, right? No, I think the human capital, you have to leverage your network, you have to leverage all these experts who've been there, done that, so that you can apply it to your specific situation. And I think you're going to shortcut a lot of the R&D time, because at least it'll give you an idea of what is the trend, what is the industry doing, what is somebody similar in my industry doing this, right? Because one advice I would say for somebody who's starting who's at a startup, who's like a one-person data team, you're going to be bombarded with questions. You're going to be like, hey, how's our business doing? What is it doing? I will always say you need to stand up to the stakeholder and say, you have to give me time to build a stable data collection. Before that, I cannot give you answers. I'm just going to be, throwing some numbers on the wall, because that's the problem. Most people want these numbers right away, and they think this person can, just whip it out, like a rabbit out of a hat. The point is, you need to have a basic. It doesn't have to be too complicated, but you need to have a solid signal collections framework, and you need to invest in that. And if you cannot build it, buy it. There's so many tools out there that can get you, Qubit, for example. It's fantastic for companies like this, where if you're a one-person data team, you can get that going. But again, it's garbage in, garbage out, right? You need to curate the basic signals, come up with what is it that I'm collecting, and then send it to these systems. But that's where I would start. I would you need a clean source of data. And a lot of times I've seen data projects fail because they're trying to answer the problem even before they can actually get a stable signaling platform.
Okay, and so how do you, I mean, this may be like a final one. It might be not easy to answer because it really comes down to the person. Like, but how do you mean you're the first, let's say, you're the one person in the data team. So how do you how do you manage this? I think it totally makes sense, and I totally agree to say, okay, we need some time to do the basics right, but
Mm.
this thing will always hang over your head. So the people will always be like, okay,
Absolutely.
are the
So,
foundations there? Are the foundations there? Can we do? Can we do? And so on. So how do
so
you handle this?
I'll tell you, out of experience, the best thing to do is sit with your executives and explain to them how data works. Because if they understand at least at a higher level, the level of complexity that it takes to get good signals, they're going to understand, that you need time to do that. And they also understand that you may have to invest in a tool to get those answers. And you have to do the part of sitting with all the stakeholders to see what are the signals they're interested in measuring, the signals that you have to measure, the conversations you have with all the different teams. It's very important. So that's what I'm saying. A person who's a one person data team in a startup should not be heads down. They have to build the business relationships. They have to be willing to speak the business speak to explain to people what it takes to get, understand good data, right? What it takes. They need to sit with the product people. They need to understand the uses. They need to understand the measurements. One of the things I do is I always try to bridge and build relationships across every team. And I always have a good relationship with the finance team because they're the ones who are balking at the high prices. Data is not cheap, right? But I always try to build those relationships because that goes much longer than just saying, I'm just going to sit here and I'm going to
Mm,
just work on data. No, because that is not the right approach. The right approach is to educate people because it is very nuanced. So you have to build relationships, educate people that this is not easy, but it doesn't have to be very hard if
mhm.
we follow the right rules, right? Because if you set realistic expectations, the executives are going to be fine with it as long
Yeah,
as you deliver. And so
yeah,
it's up to you to do bridge those gaps.
yeah, and deliver in the end.
Yeah.
At least, like, yeah, that's right. Okay, I would like to close, and so we can move away from data, or maybe we stay to this. So there, one question. Did you read a book or listen to a book? So I'm always listen to books usually. This year that you would say, okay, this was so good that you would like to share it, or let's say recommend to a broader audience.
Okay. Because I've also been in school over the past 3 years. So I've been working on
Mm.
my executive MBA, but I'm doing a very bespoke, custom, pick and choose type
Yeah.
courses. Finish my lead certification from Stanford, but I've also taken enough courses from Harvard Business School online. And there's a lot of books that come through this kind of learning.
Yes.
uh, I basically found that there is a book. It's a very popular book. I don't have the exact title in front of me,
Hmm.
but it's about uh, it's the growth mindset.
Okay.
That, I think, I'll give you a very short.
Hmm.
I don't want to take up too much time. So when I worked at Pluto TV, I reported to the CTO of Vibol. And one thing about Vibol was he was very good at finding out where you need to improve, and he would give you books to read. And so initially I was like a little skeptical, but he gave me this book. And I read the book, and it completely flipped how I think, because now I don't think of failures as failures or challenges as, oh my God, what is this? No, I look at it as a learning opportunity.
Hmm.
So really, that was a turning experience, because I came with a rigid approach as to, you cannot do this. If you make a mistake, you're gonna pay. And then I go, no, it's just a learning experience. So I really
Hmm.
thank him for pointing me onto that. But ever since I read that, it's a pretty popular book, Growth
I will
Mindset.
ask you afterwards. So, okay,
Sure,
gross
sure.
mindset. Okay, yeah.
But I read that book, and then I embarked on my MBA journey.
Hmm.
And I've learned so much now about so many things outside of engineering and outside of other things. Another book is, I actually have this one course that I took at Stanford. It's
Hmm.
called Power, The Power to Lead.
Hmm.
And I'll send you the book. It's basically a
Hmm.
very different take on leadership. Basically, it says, if you want that, go get it.
Okay.
Really, it's as simple as that. First thing you do, if you're a mid-level manager, make sure you know everybody up the chain.
Hmm.
Book 15 minutes with them, talk to them, get to understand them. The whole point is, uh, some people might climb, but some people might be bored. They find that, they're frustrated about their mid-level career because they're not going anywhere and they could do a lot more. But you really have to build relationships to let the others know what you can do, right?
Hmm.
So Power, it's an intense book, and it's also another thing that might change stand your concepts
Yeah.
its head. Yeah,
No, I can see that. So I'm usually like I'm a person who usually try to avoid power, but I can totally see where this can definitely help to understand the concept of that.
I
So,
think it's at least to understand it, and to understand
mm,
that, there are two things. Both of these books, in a way, try to program you out of traditional thinking. Why is this happening to me? Why am I not doing this, doing that? No, you have the power to do it. You just have to implement it. You need to build up your confidence, you need to build your brand, and you need to go, and you need to really, if you can provide something of value, you need to tell the world that you can provide that value. And similarly with growth mindset, you don't go there and say, oh, I failed, or, oh, see, again, I'm not good enough. No, it's just, if you have a growth mindset, you will learn from it. You say, oh, it's a setback, but it's not a setback, it's a learning experience. And you move on with the learning experience, and when you embrace that, you'll be learning for life, and you'll be improving yourself, in my opinion.
that's, no, it's nice. I think yeah, I would definitely read both of them. I guess it will be helpful for me. So I did a lot of stuff in the last 3 years where I always said, okay, when I'm afraid of something, I try to do it, at least like let's say business wise
Yeah.
and technology wise, just to do this, what you just described. So of course
Mhm.
I'm happy to fail first and do the next step and so on. It definitely helped a lot to do this.
Yeah, because
Um,
nothing will be a setback.
mm,
So
yeah,
tomorrow my refrigerator dies. Okay, it ran its 10 years course. That's
yeah,
just nature. You don't sit there and say, oh my
yeah,
God, now I gotta. No, all right, fine.
yeah.
The
Moving
refrigerator.
on. Yeah,
Yes, move on. Yeah.
yeah. Final question, and it's always interesting. I always ask this question, and usually like, and now I do it a little bit different. So usually I ask people what's their best playlist or best kind of thing to work, but most of the people told me they don't listen to any music while they're working. So what kind of person are you? Are you listening to music while you're working, or you don't?
I'm a musician. I constantly have jazz, or,
Okay.
even militant jazz fusion, always constantly running. Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm very partial to like the 70s and 80s jazz fusion, or like the 60s cool jazz, Miles Davis, or even earlier 30s. So I'm a very, I think it makes me perform better. I think it
Mm.
elevates me, but I've done this over so many years, decades, right? So I'm so used to it. But yeah, it'll be strange if there's no music playing in the house.
Yeah, no, it's I can totally relate to this. So if I really want to get stuff done, I need music, and I need a specific kind of music. So I mean, for me, it's really weird. I usually really have to have really speed metal, really, let's say, high
That's
beat
where
number,
you're
because
wild
like it's
developers.
perfect. So yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
if I do something slower, I think slower. So it really correlates with this. So
The
um,
one thing is, when I'm studying, I like classical music.
yeah, okay,
Yeah, and
yeah,
the only thing is, being a musician, sometimes you can go off on a tangent with the music
yeah,
because you're thinking, right? You're not
yeah,
just, it's not in the background. You're thinking about the music as well.
yes. This is the reason why I cannot listen to podcasts when I work, because like this is always happening. So basically, my mind goes off, and yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I mean, this was really good, because like it filled some areas where I didn't really thought about, and like thanks for sharing, especially like your experience and
Of
like the
course.
different kind of approaches, different kind of ideas, and so. For everyone else, so we will be back already next week. So next week we will have discussion about how to use quantitative and qualitative data combination. I'm really looking forward to. And for everyone else, have a great. So for me, it's already evening. For everyone else, I guess it's still day. So have a great evening, and see you
Thank
next
you,
time.
Simone. Thank you for
Thank
the
you as
opportunity.
well.